Chapter 5 The Blood Harvesting. As Coram and Maeve descended somewhat nervously from the she-rock, the bull's eyes remained fixed on the spear which Coram carried. Now the animal stood very still, looming over them as they approached it. Its head was slightly lowered. It seemed as suspicious of them as they were fearful of it. Yet it was plain that it recognised Bryanak, and that it had respect for that spear. "Bull," said Coram, and he did not feel foolish for speaking to a beast in this way. "Will you come with us to Caer Marlod?" The rain had turned to sleet now, and the sleet glistened on the bull's black flanks. Further along the beach, the horses were showing signs of fear. They were more than suspicious of the black bull of Cyrnanas. They were in stark terror of it. But the bull ignored the horses. It shook its head, and droplets of moisture flew from the tips of its two sharp horns. Its nostrils quivered. Its hard, intelligent eyes glanced once at the horses and then returned to gaze upon the spear. Although Coram had in the past been in the presence of much larger creatures, he had never confronted an animal which gave such a strong impression of power. It seemed to him at that moment that nothing on earth could stand against the massive bull. Coram and Maeve left the bull watching them and crossed the wind-blown sand to calm their horses. They succeeded eventually in soothing them enough so that they could be ridden, but they were still skittish. Then, for there was naught else they could do, they began to ride up the cliff paths, going back towards Caer Marlod. After a few minutes, when it remained stock still, as if considering a problem, the black bull of Cyrnanas started to follow them, though it never came very close to them. Perhaps, thought Coram, such a beast as that disdained to keep intimate company with mortals as weak as themselves. And the sleet soon turned to snow, and the snow blew cold and fierce upon the cliffs of the west. And Coram and Maeve knew that these were signs that the Fóimíor approached, and might even now have reached the walls of Caer Marlod. It was indeed a horrid massing which had collected at the walls of the Mabden fortress, as scum might collect around a proud ship's hull. The white mist was thick, almost viscous. It still clung largely to the forest, and usually in parts of the forest where there were conifers. Here hid the Fóimíor themselves, and the mist was necessary to them. It was a limbo mist which sustained them. Without it they would be ill at ease. Coram saw the 7 dark shapes moving about in it. They had left their chariots and seemed to be conferring. Cyrnanas himself, chief of the Fóimíor, must be there, and Balar, who, like Coram, had but one eye, but a deadly eye, and Goim, the female Fóimíor, with a taste for the manhood of mortals, and the others. Coram and Maeve reined in their horses and turned to see if the black bull still followed them. It did. It stopped when they stopped, its eyes still upon the spear Bryanak. The fight had begun. The hounds of Cyrnanas leapt at the walls as they had leapt before, but the Gulag ran against the Mabden too with bows and spears, and the pale green riders charged the gate, led by one who was unmistakably Hugh Argech, whom Coram should have slain. Even from where they watched upon an eminence, upon looking down upon Caer Marlod, Coram and Maeve could hear the cries of the defenders and the howling of the dreadful dogs. "Well, how can we reach our folk now?" Maeve said in despair. "Even if we reached the gates, they would be fools to open them to admit us," Coram agreed. We must confine ourselves, I suppose, to attacking them from the rear until they realise that we are behind them. Maeve nodded. She pointed. Let us ride over there, where the walls are most breached. We might be able to give our folk time to repair the damage. Coram saw that her suggestion had sense in it. Without a word, he spurred his horse down the hill, the spear Bryanak poised for a cast at the first of his foes that he should meet. It was almost certain that he and Maeve would die, but at that moment he did not care. All he regretted was that he would not die in his name robe, the scarlet robe he had given to Calatin on the mountain, on the coast of Moidor's Mount. As he rode nearer, he was able to see that the ice phantoms were not in this army. Perhaps those creatures were not the creations of the Foimure after all. But the Gulig were, that was certain. Being almost indestructible, they were proving a hard enemy for the Mabden to cope with. And who led them into battle? A rider on a tall horse. A rider who was not pale green like Hugh Argek, yet still familiar. How many men were familiar to him in this world? Very few. The light caught the armour of the rider. In a moment it had changed from bright gold to dull silver, from scarlet to flickering blue. Coram knew that he had seen that armour before, and that he himself had sent its wearer to Limbo in a great fight at the camp of Queen Xiombarg's forces. To Limbo, where the Foimure perhaps was still secure, before the disruption of the fabric of the multiverse had sent them into this world to poison it. And had it sent that rider with them? It was a likely explanation. The dark yellow plume still nodded on the rider's helm, which as before completely obscured the face. The breastplate was still engraved with the arms of chaos, the 8 arrows radiating from a central hub. And in this glove of metal was a sword which also shone sometimes gold, sometimes silver, sometimes blue and scarlet. Gaenor, said Coram, and he recalled the terror of Gaenor's death. It is Prince Gaenor the Damned. You know that warrior, she said. I slew him once, said Coram grimly, or at least I banished him. I thought from this world at least, but there he is, my old enemy. Could he be the brother, I wonder, of whom the old woman spoke? This last question was addressed to himself. He had already drawn back his arm and flung Bryanak towards Prince Gaenor, who had once been a champion, perhaps the champion eternal himself, but was now pledged wholly to evil. Bryanak went flying to its target, and it struck Prince Gaenor's shoulder and made him stagger in the saddle. The faceless helm turned and watched as the spear flew back into Coram's hand. Gaenor had been directing his Gulig against the weak parts of Caer Marlod's walls. They ran through the snow, which had been stained red by blood and black by mud. Many were missing limbs, features, and even innards, but still they worked. Coram gripped the spear Bryanak, and he knew that, as before, Gaenor was not easily beaten, even by magic. He heard Gaenor's laughter from within the helm. Gaenor seemed almost pleased to see him, as if glad to see a familiar face, whether it was friend or foes. Prince Coram, the champion of the Mabden. We were speculating on your absence, thinking that you had sensibly fled, perhaps even returning to your own world. But here you are. How whimsical is fate that she wills us to continue our silly squabble. Coram looked back for a moment and saw that the bull of Crinanar still followed. He looked beyond Gaenor at the battered walls of Caer Marlod. He saw many dead men on the battlements. Indeed she is, he said. But would you fight me again, Prince Gaenor? Would you beg me for mercy again? Would you have me send you to limbo again? Prince Gaynor laughed his bitter laugh and said, Ask the Foymure that last question. They would be only too pleased to return to their dreadful homeland. And if they left me, and if I had no loyalties, now that chaos and law no longer war upon this plain, I should be pleased to join with you, Coram. But as it is, as usual, we must battle. Coram remembered what he had seen on Gaynor's face the time he had opened the man's helm. He shuddered. Again he felt pity for Gaynor the Damned, who was bound to live out many existences on many different planes, just as was Coram, though Gaynor was destined to serve the meanest and most treacherous of masters. Now his soldiers were half-dead things. Previously they had been beast things. The quality of your infantry seems up to standard, said Coram. Gaynor laughed again, his voice muffled from within his never-opened helmet. Even better in some respects, I'd say. Would you not call them off and join with me, Gaynor? You know that I had little hatred for you at the end. We have more in common than any others here. Oh, true, said Gaynor, but why not side with me, Coram? After all, Foymure conquest is inevitable. And will inevitably lead to death. That is what I have been promised, said Gaynor simply. And Coram knew that Gaynor wanted death more than anything, and that he would not argue with the damned prince unless he, Coram, could offer Gaynor a death that was still quicker. When the world dies, Gaynor continued, shall not I die too? Coram looked beyond Prince Gaynor the Damned at the battlements of Caer Marlod and the handful of Mabden fighting for their lives against half-dead Gulig, snapping devil dogs and creatures who were more trees than men. It is possible, Gaynor, he said thoughtfully, that it is your doom to be forever siding with evil in an effort to gain your ends, when, if you achieved a noble deed, your wishes would be granted. A romantic view, I fear, Prince Coram. Gaynor turned his horse away. What? Said Coram. You will not fight me? Nay, nor your bovine friend, said Gaynor. He rode back towards the cover of the mist. I wish to remain on this world until the finish. I'll not be sent back to limbo again by you. His tone was equable, even friendly, as he cried, But I'll return later to look upon your corpse, Coram. You think it will be here? We think that perhaps 30 of your folk are left alive, and that before the evening our hounds will be feasting within your walls. Therefore, yes, I think your corpse will be here. Farewell, Coram. And Gaynor was gone. Coram and Maeve were riding on for the broken wall. Now they heard the black bull of Crinanas snorting behind them. They thought at first it chased them for daring to summon it, but it veered off and charged at a knot of pale green riders who had sighted Coram and Maeve and had intended to ride them down. The black bull of Crinanas lowered its head and drove straight into the group of riders, scattered their beasts, tossing men high into the air and then charging onward, straight into a rank of Gulig, trampling every one of them, turning its tail high and its head nodding to spike a devil dog on each horn. It dominated the whole battlefield, that black bull of Crinanas. It shook off any weapons that might find a mark in its hide. It charged with fearful speed thrice around the walls of Caer Marlod, while Coram and Maeve, forgotten by their enemies, looked on with stunned delight. And Coram held the spear Bryanak high into the air and cheered the black bull of Crinanas until he saw that there was a gap in the ranks of the stunned besiegers, and lowered his head, bade Maeve to follow him, and urged his horse towards Caer Marlod, leaping it through the breach and stopping it by chance directly before a weary and much wounded King Monarch, who sat upon a rock, trying to stop the blood flowing from his mouth, while an old man tried to remove the arrowhead from his lung. There were tears in King Monarch's eyes as he lifted his old, noble head to stare at Coram. "But the bull has come too late," he said. "Too late, perhaps," said Coram, "but at least you will see the bull destroy those who have destroyed your folk." "No," said King Monarch, "I will not watch. I am tired of it." As Maeve comforted her father, Coram went around the walls of Caer Marlod, taking stock of their situation, while the bull of Crinanas occupied the enemy outside. Prince Gaynor had been wrong. There were not 30 able-bodied men left on the walls, but 40, and outside were still many of the hounds, several squadrons of pale green riders, and a fair number of Gulag. Moreover, the Foimur themselves had yet to move upon Caer Marlod, and any one of the gods of Limbo probably had the power to destroy the city, if he cared to leave his misty sanctuary for a few moments. Coram climbed to the highest tower of the battlements, now particularly in ruins. The bull was chasing little groups of their enemies all over the muddy battlefield. Many were fleeing, heedless of the chilling, booming noises which came from the mist over the forest, the voices, no doubt, of the Foimur. And those who did not heed the voices were as doomed as those who paused, turned, and were destroyed by the mighty bull, for they did not run far before they fell dead, slain by their own masters. The Foimur did not seem to care that they wasted their creatures so, and did nothing to stop the carnage which the black bull of Crinanas was wreaking. Coram supposed that the cold folk knew that they could still crush Caer Marlod, and perhaps deal with the bull too. And then it was over. Not a single Gulag, not a single hound, and not a single pale green rider remained alive. What mortal weapons could not slay, the black bull had slain. It stood triumphant among the corpses of men, beasts, and things that were like men. It pawed at the ground, and its breath foamed from its nostrils. It raised its head, and it bellowed, and that bellow shook the walls of Caer Marlod. Yet still the Foimur had not moved from their mist. None on the battlements cheered, for they knew that the main attack was still to come. Now, save for the great bull's triumphant lowing, there was a silence about the scene. Death was everywhere. Death hung over the battlefield. Death inhabited the fortress. And death waited in the mist-shrouded forest. Coram remembered something King Monarch had told him, how the Foimur pursued death. Did they, like Prince Gaynor, long for oblivion? Was this their main concern? If so, it made them an even more terrifying enemy. The mist had begun to move. Coram cried out to the survivors to ready themselves. In his silver hand he held up the spear Bryanak so that all could see. "Here is the spear of the She. There is the last of the She war cattle. And here stands Coram Law Eraint. Rally, men of Caer Marlod, for the Foimur come against us now in all of their strength. But we have strength, we have courage, and this is our land and our world, and we must defend it." Coram saw Maeve. He saw her smile up at him and heard her cry out, "If we die, then let us die in a way that will make our legend great." Even King Monarch, leaning on the arm of a warrior who was himself wounded, seemed to recover from his depression. Sound men and wounded men, youths and maidens, the aged, now swarmed up to the walls of Caer Marlod and steadied their hearts as they saw 7 shadows and 7 creaking battle carts drawn by 7 misshapen beasts reach the bottom of the hill upon which Caer Marlod stood. and the mist surrounded them again. And the black bull of Crinanas was also engulfed in the pale, clinging stuff, and they no longer heard his lowing. It was as if the mist had poisoned him, and perhaps that was what had happened. Coram took aim at the first looming shade, aiming for what appeared to be the heads, though the outline was much distorted. The creaking of the chariots grated on his bones, and his body wanted to do little but curl in on itself. But he resisted the sensation and cast the spear Bryanak. Slowly the spear, it seemed to sunder the mist as it passed through and went true to its target, and produced for an instant a strange honk of pain. Then the spear returned to his hand, and the honking continued. In other circumstances the sound might have been ludicrous, but here it was sinister and menacing. It was the voice of an insensate beast, of a stupid being, and Coram realised that the owner of that voice was a creature of little intelligence and monstrous will, of primitive will. And that was what made the Foimure so dangerous. They were motivated by blind need. They could not understand their plight. They could think of no way to deal with it but to continue their conquests, continue them without malice or hatred or any sense of vengeance. They used what they needed. They made use of whatever powers they had, of whoever would serve them, to seek an impossible goal. Yes, that was what made them almost impossible to defeat. They could not be bargained with, reasoned with. Fear was all that might stop them, and it was plain that the one who had honked did fear the she-spear. The advancing chariots began to slow as the Foimure grunted to each other. A moment later a face appeared out of the mists. It was more like a wound than a face. It was red, and there was lumps of raw flesh hanging on it, and the mouth was distorted and appeared in the left cheek, and there was but one eye with a great lid of dead flesh, and attached to that eyelid was a wire which ran over the skull and under the armpit, and could be pulled by the two-fingered hand to open the eyelid. The hand moved now, tugging at the wire. Coram was filled with an instinctive feeling of danger and was already ducking behind the battlement as the eye opened. The eye was blue like northern ice, and from it poured a radiance. Bitter cold gnawed at Coram's body, though he was not in the direct path of that radiance, and now he knew how those people by the lake had died, frozen in the postures of war. The cold was so intense that it knocked him backward and almost off the ledge. He recovered, crawled further away and raised his head, the spear poised. Already several of the warriors on the battlements were rigid and dead. Coram threw the spear Bryanak. He threw it at the blue eye. For one moment it seemed that Bryanak had been frozen in the air. It hovered, suspended, and then appeared to make a conscious effort to continue. And the point, glowing bright orange now as it had glowed against the ice phantoms, sliced into the eye. And then Coram knew from which of the Foimure the honking had come. The hand dropped the wire, and the eyelid closed even as the spear withdrew itself and returned to Coram. The travesty of a face twisted, and the head turned this way and that, while the beast which pulled the chariot lurched round and began to retreat into the mist. Coram felt a certain elation enter his mind. The she-weapon had been especially made to fight the Foimure, and it did its job well. Now one of the six was in retreat. Coram called out to the people on the wall. "Get back to the ground and leave me here alone, for I have the spear Bryanak. Your weapons can do nothing against the Foimure. Let me stand here and fight them. Maeve cried back, Let me stand with you, Coram, to die with you. But he shook his head and turned to regard the advancing cold folk. Still it was hard to see them. A suggestion of a horned head, a hint of bristling hair, a glint which might have been the glint of an eye. There came a roaring then. Was that the voice of Keranos, chieftain of the Foimure? No. The roaring came from behind the Foimure chariots. An even larger, darker shape reared up behind them, and Coram gasped as he recognised it. It was the Black Bull of Crinanas, grown, huger, but losing none of its mass. It lowered its horns, and it plucked one of the Foimure from its chariot and tossed the god up into the sky, caught the god on its horn and tossed the god again. The Foimure were in panic. They wheeled their war carts and began a sudden retreat. Coram saw Prince Gaynor, tiny and terrified, running with them. The mist moved faster than a tidal wave, back over the forest, out over the plain, and disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind it a wasteland of corpses, and the Black Bull of Crinanas, which had shrunk to its previous size and was now grazing contentedly on a patch of grass, somehow left untrampled on the battlefield. But on its horns were dark smears, and there were pieces of meat scattered about nearby. In some distance to the left of the Black Bull of Crinanas was a huge chariot, much bigger than the bull, which had overturned, its wheel still spinning. It was a crude thing, of wood and wickerwork poorly crafted. The folk of Caer Marlod were not jubilant, though they had been saved from destruction. They were stunned at what had happened. Very slowly they began to gather on the battlements to look at all the destruction. Coram walked slowly down the steps, the spear Bryanak still held loosely in his silver hand. He walked through the tunnel and out of the gate of Caer Marlod, and he walked across the ruined earth to where the bull was grazing. He did not know why he went to the bull, and this time the creature did not move away from him, but turned its huge head and stared into his eyes. You must slay me now, said the Black Bull of Crinanas. And then my destiny will be complete. It spoke in the pure tongue of the Varthag and the She. It spoke calmly, yet sadly. I cannot slay you, said Coram. You have saved us all. You killed one of the Foimure, so that now they number only 6. Caer Marlod still stands, and many of her folk still live because of what you did. It is what you did, said the bull. You found the spear Bryanak. You called me. I knew what must happen. Well, why must I slay you? It is my destiny. It is necessary. Very well, said Coram. I will do what you request. And he took the spear Bryanak and cast it into the heart of the Black Bull of Crinanas. And a great gout of blood burst from the bull's side. And the beast began to run, and this time the spear stayed where it was and did not return to Coram's hand. Over the whole battlefield ran the Black Bull of Crinanas. Through the forest it ran, and across the moors beyond. Along the cliffs by the sea it ran, and its blood washed the whole land. And where the blood touched the land, it became green, and flowers grew up, and trees came into leaf. Slowly, above, the sky was clearing, and the clouds fled in the wake of the Foimure. And the sky became blue and warm sun shone. And when the sun spread heat across all the world around Caer Marlod, the bull ran towards the broken cliffs where Castle Erawn stood. And the bull leapt the chasm which separated the cliff from the tower, and it stood beside the tower for a moment, its knees buckling as the blood still trickled from its wound. It looked back at Coram, then it staggered to the headland and flung itself over into the sea. And the spear, Brionac, still stayed in the side of the black bull of Crinanas, and was never afterwards seen again in mortal lands. Epilogue. And that was the end of the tale of the bull and the spear. All signs of the struggle had disappeared from hill, forest, and plain. Summer had come to Caer Marlod at last, and many believed that the blood of the black bull had made the land safe forever from the encroachment of the cold folk. And Coram Jalen Ursay of the Vardhag folk lived life among the Tua na Crem Cruach, and that, to them, was a further guarantee of their security. Even the old woman whom Coram had met on the frozen plain no longer muttered her gloomy warnings. All were happy. And they were happy that Coram lay with Maeve, daughter of King Monarch, for it meant that he would stay with them. They harvested their crops, and they sang in the fields, and they feasted well, for the land was rich again where the bull had run. Sometimes Coram, lying beside his new love, would awake in the night and fancy that he heard cool and melancholy strains of a harp. He would brood on that old woman's words and would wonder why he should fear the harp, a brother and, above all, beauty. And at those times, of all the folk dwelling at Caer Marlod, Coram was not happy.